Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to Data Platform Down Under for the month of March. This month, we've got William Asaf, who, former MVP, works for Microsoft, and his colleague, Randolph West, who is here to help us out as well, also a former MVP and now a Microsoft employee who both work in the Docs department. Over the next hour, they're going to take us through contributing to open source Microsoft Docs. This session is being recorded and will be made available on the Data Platform Downunder YouTube channel. I will put the link in the chat, so if you haven't already registered, feel free to sign up to that and you're able to come back and watch not just this session, but all of the sessions that we've recorded and uploaded there. Because the session is being recorded, if you have any questions at any time, put them in the chat window. Both Randolph and myself will be watching those to allow William to go through this session. Or if you want to wait to the end, feel free. You can put your hand up and come off of mute and ask any questions related to this session at any point in time. So with that, I'll hand over to William and Randolph to kick us off for today's session.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. My colleague, my writing partner and friend Randolph will be helping to field any questions you have. We really want this to be interactive, so feel free to pepper us with any questions you have, as long as they're nice. No, I'm kidding. Randolph can take it. They're good for that. So everybody can see the slides?
Yes.
Amazing. Welcome to What's New in Contributing to Microsoft Learn. If you've seen this presentation before, I promise we have some new stuff. We're going to go through a lot. We're going to go through how Microsoft Docs uses GitHub. We're going to go through Docs themselves, and we're going to go throughout how all of this can benefit you in your career, especially if you are or are pursuing Microsoft MVP status. And then a lot of other ways it can benefit your career as well, including just giving back to the community, which is why we are all here. So we're going to talk about how to contribute to Microsoft's open source Docs as code in GitHub and what you need to know to become a contributor to Docs. The first thing you need is an account on github.com if you don't have one already. Then you can get involved, you can give feedback, you can give corrections and edits to the Docs that the entire community uses. You might find this very rewarding to your career, your MVP activity reports again, your personal brand, your blog, and so forth. None of this, by the way, is particular to, some of this is particular to SQL Server and the data platform. This is a data platform group. We're both former data platform MVPs. We both work on the database Docs team at Microsoft, but actually this applies to everything. Anything in Azure, any development project, Windows, things like that. Any of the Docs that we're talking about, this all applies to there. So, on the database Docs team, Randolph and I and others, including other former MVPs, work with the product groups and program managers for everything SQL Server, including all its various flavors in Azure, as well as Azure Synapse, Microsoft Fabric, and all the technologies under those umbrellas. Also on our team, we have all the open source databases known as ORCAs, so MySQL, Postgres. We have Cosmos DB. So we have all the databases. That's why we're called the Database Docs team. We also cover all the tooling for the data platform, like Management Studio, Azure Data Studio, and we're called the Database Docs team for a good reason. We're more than a content team. Today, we're not really talking about those databases, but really, rather, all of Microsoft Docs and all its technologies, Microsoft Learn, and specifically how we use GitHub. Microsoft Docs are not Wikipedia. Important note there. We're not a wiki, so it's not open to all edits. It's very carefully curated, but we do have hundreds of thousands of articles. And SQL Server, by the way, is one of the biggest single estates of all doc content in Microsoft Learn. So we want to embrace the wisdom of you and the technical user community to help maintain a high level of quality. Opening the docs up to external contributors is one of the ways we scale. So to get your mind going with a bunch of ideas and how to learn, contribute to Learn content, and then we're going to talk about all sorts of other stuff going on. Keep in mind that these ideas are to contribute to content and engagement and the quality of them. And this all contributes to your MVP activity report, which, like I said in the beginning, if we were chatting at the beginning, the MVP activity report is going to look at your Docs contributions qualitatively, not quantitatively. I'll go more into that, and we'd be happy to answer questions. Randolph and I don't review MVP activity reports, but we'd be happy to answer questions along the way. So how could you contribute? So identifying Microsoft Learn content like common mistakes, things that are missing. Anything in a solution, a quick start, a tutorial, a frequently asked questions. A frequently asked questions is actually a good call to action. If you have a frequently asked questions in your area that you're working in, those are great potential contributions for external communities. Just to ask and answer a new question potentially could be very useful. Especially, by the way, how various Azure products interact with each other could be a potentially really good contribution to an FAQ. FAQ articles, again, a great start. Recommended architecture, best practices. We have the Azure Architecture Center. We have a well-architected framework. Those are all included in what we're talking about today. Those are great places to either update or improve the guidance, the opinionated guidance that are in those areas. Microsoft Q&A, also part of Learn. You can respond, update answers, maybe even update answers with better solutions, more complete solutions. This one's relatively new. You can create and mention public collections in Learn. Gathering up. So what is a collection? A collection is gathering up docs, gathering up Learn modules for training, gathering up Q&A answers, even external links, all into a single topic. Maybe an exam that you're preparing for, or a project that you've been working on, or a thing you've been troubleshooting at work. Gather up everything you've put together. You can share that collection on your blog. Maybe even make it a recommended learning solution for a particular problem or a certification or a set. You could even use a Microsoft collection in replying to Microsoft Q&A questions, for example. So these custom Learn collections can be also the target of Cloud Skills Challenges. If you've not done a Cloud Skills Challenge before, I believe we're in the process currently. I'm not really sure where we are right this moment. We're in the process currently of making these available to the public so everybody could create a custom Cloud Skills Challenge. If not, they should be soon. And finally, what we're talking about today. The last thing of all these things that we've been talking about, the last thing we're talking about today is interacting with me and Randolph and everybody else on a Docs team at Microsoft for contributing to open source content on GitHub, which is where all of Microsoft Docs are hosted. So why? Why contribute to Microsoft Docs? Docs specifically, there's actually quite a few reasons. So you can identify, prevent common mistakes, document lessons that you learned. Perhaps there's something that you had to do or you had to troubleshoot or fix or solve, and that solution is not documented. Well, that could be a great addition to the rest of the community. There's no better way to get your solution published than to add it. Randolph and I just reviewed a query that came through today about looking at the duration of SQL agent job, something like that, in a new way. Great solution. It looks like it comes from somebody's blog post, frankly, because of the formatting was pretty particular. That's a great addition that everybody else could benefit from and save time from. What a great way to contribute to the community, right? You can recommend best practices. You can add. You'll notice in Microsoft Docs we have these colorful boxes, the notes and the cautions, things like that. We try not to overuse those, by the way. Research has proven that if you put too many of those notes and cautions and tips and things like that in important little colorful boxes, that customers don't read them. So we try to not put too many of those on the page at one time as you're scrolling through. That way they actually do stand out as something valuable. But that could be something you contribute as well. You can see in the syntax and the markdown, it's actually very easy to understand how those things work. How could this benefit your internal career? Show your manager. That's pretty legitimizing if you get something published, and we're going to show how you can get your name published and your GitHub account published on a Docs article. That's pretty legitimizing to your team, to your colleagues, to your manager, to your manager's manager, to your future employers, things like that. If you're a consultant, definitely something to show your clients that, yeah, hey, I contributed to this solution on Microsoft Docs. I know what I'm talking about. You can get your name known to content developers like Randolph and I, to program managers who run the products in your area of expertise inside Microsoft. You can be a resource to them. That opens up doors. We know who our favorite contributors are by their GitHub username, by their name. Randolph and I could list our favorite GitHub contributors right now, probably. We won't, but
My top three.
Establish your own personal brand. Again, your MVP activity. If you're not an expert in your area, this is one way to learn and grow in that. And finally, inside Learn, we have a team that has started a series of contributor spotlights where we interview both internal and external to Microsoft Docs contributors who go above and beyond to contribute. So, for example, all of these folks have been, you might recognize some of these, they're MVPs in your area. For the last year now, on the Azure Developer Community blog, which is linked right there, and by the way, we're using PowerPoint Live, so you can actually click on this link in the slide right now to go to the Azure Developer Community blog. And you can see the other interviews we've been doing with people like you in the field. Also people inside Microsoft whose job is not on the content team, people who are working in support or field engineering like that, who are contributing to Docs as well. We interview them. For escalation engineers, by the way, I think some of these are escalation engineers. So these public blogs are then boosted on LinkedIn. Just one more way that we've been encouraging and rewarding contributions to Learn content. These spotlights are nominated by the Docs teams, nominated by people like Randolph and I. The same folks who would also review and sign off on your pull requests in GitHub. We're going to talk about that. So this would be a very nice item to list on your MVP activity report and to build your personal brand as well. Okay, let's talk about Microsoft Docs. First off, any questions about anything we've said? Randolph, anything interesting in the chat so far? I'm not looking at chat.
There is nothing in the chat yet, but we're still early days.
It's still early days. Well, we welcome your feedback. We want this to be interactive. Again, if you have questions at any time, and we should have time at the end for Q&A. Let's talk about Microsoft Docs. So just to give you a map, and I'll go quickly here. I'm not going to walk you around every button on the page, but just to give you a map of navigating specific docs and some of the features that we have without explaining every button, but I will explain the buttons that have changed recently, stuff that you may not have noticed. So I've got some nice zoom animations here going too. Let's look a little closer at this cluster of buttons next to the breadcrumb path at the top of the Docs navigation. That plus button is the thing I was talking about earlier. That allows you to save this link to a collection. And now in your Microsoft Learn collection, this would be alongside other things, even external links that all go together for something you've been working on. You can save docs to a collection alongside Learn modules, Q&A pages, all that kind of stuff. All right. The feedback and the pencil buttons. Let's talk about this. So the plus button is alongside the pencil button for the sharing. The pencil button helps start a pull request, something we're going to be talking about in detail shortly in this presentation. That is the best way to contribute a suggestion or new content or a fix to a doc. Also, the feedback button brings you to the submit immediate feedback button in the article. This is internally called a verbatim. Verbatims are usually very short and sweet, and they're also a one-way communication. So if you want to hit the feedback and tell us something's wrong, that's great. We're not going to be able to get back to you and ask any clarifying questions or anything like that, which is why we prefer the pencil button, and I'm going to talk about that a lot today. So one of the advantages of starting a pull request in that pencil button is that it allows for two-way communication with Microsoft, so we can have a conversation about what you've been, needing to add or fix in the docs. Let's keep going around the docs page. These additional resource links in the right are automatically generated by a machine learning algorithm. You'll see links to relevant Learn training modules, certifications, learning paths, things like that. There are two search boxes on the page, just to be super clear about what they're for. In the top right, the one I have shown right now, searches the entire technology stack that you're in. For example, it would search all of Azure. And from that results page, you can expand your search into all of Docs even. Over here, we're just searching titles in the current table of contents that you're in. This can actually be more valuable if you know exactly what you want to do. If you're searching for the system object that you're looking for example, it would probably be a faster way to search here. So this TOC includes many different articles for the product, and here you can search just on the titles. You might find this more convenient than a wider scoped search in the top right-hand corner. Keeping it going, in the center of the article, you see a mini table of contents and navigation links to immediately jump to an article's major headings from the top. And this applies to, Randolph has actually worked a lot on this, and their work here has been very beneficial. On most articles, you'll find the applies to line here with a hyperlink in the product title. This hyperlink brings you to the navigation guide page, which is a helpful breakdown of which products are which. And so, as a quick aside, top question that we get, if it says applies to SQL Server, it probably means only the box product of SQL Server, or the SQL Server year-based product, the thing with a year after it. The version of SQL Server you can get on a virtual machine, not Azure SQL Database, which is a database as a service offering, or Azure SQL Managed Instance, which is closer to infrastructure as a service, right? And those are both Azure managed services. And the navigation page helps break those down for you to explain those to others or to help your own understanding. We try to pay a lot of attention to the applies to line and the metadata of the docs about which docs apply to which products, because there's a dozen different flavors of SQL Server and growing out there that a doc may or may not apply to. So if you spot something that doesn't look right to you, make sure you have the version in the top left-hand corner, that drop-down list selected right. But it's potentially a really good contribution, is to say, hey, this article does or does not apply correctly to whatever product that you happen to be working on. And we're going to talk about how to do that via the methods in this presentation. Okay, so those, go ahead.
Can I interject here? A very good example of this is we've recently been looking at the configuration settings for SQL Server box product. And it turns out, coincidentally, no surprise, that a lot of them also apply to managed instance. So if you're using Azure SQL Managed Instance, it may be the case that some of these features do apply there as well, but we've never set the applies to say managed instance as well. So that's one way that we could definitely benefit from people's experience, because we have tens of thousands of articles and 7 of us.
Yeah, we've definitely tried to be more verbose about that kind of thing, because all of these products that we've talked about so far run the SQL database engine, right? It's the same engine. The implementation details are different. Some of the features are different. Some of the stuff is not there because it makes sense for it not to be there, right? That's important for us to make clear. And so Randolph's been doing a lot of good work on there on the SQL MI side. Cool.
We do question.
Yeah.
From the general public, a person by the name of Warwick Rudd.
Warwick,
says,
I've heard of him. I think he's pretty cool.
Apart from technical feedback, what if somebody finds that the docs are not user-friendly? For example, it's spoken about quite a lot how the design and colors may not work out to ensure accessibility set up for all those who need to use the docs. So how do you handle feedback for accessibility, not just technical?
Right, so I have some links coming up in a few slides about product feedback. We have a whole portal for product feedback. You might remember it if you're an old DBA like I am, the what was it called? The Microsoft ideas, or what was it called back then? This
is a question about the docs themselves, not product feedback.
Well, you mentioned colors and stuff like that. Okay, docs colors, there are a bunch of options you could change with that. First off, for accessibility, you can choose different themes for dark, light, high contrast, things like that, certain colorblind modes. If it is an issue with colors in a screenshot, then it would probably be product feedback, right? The ideas pages now, I have a link to those later, specifically for SQL Server even. Those would be the places to suggest feedback like that. Happy to continue this conversation. So any clarification on that?
Warwick, do you have any more to add to that?
No, just wanted to see if that was something that was taken into account.
Well, sure, because that's not a pull request, right? That wouldn't be changing the content of the docs. That'd be changing something about the user experience. So the product ideas area, if it's about a specific product, if it's just about like the website, about docs, that feedback button right there could be one for you, or just Microsoft Q&A in general in like a discussion forum, depending on how broad or general it is. But look, we're also happy to take that feedback right now. Like we work on this team, we could provide that feedback. If you have any specifics, we'd be happy to talk about it. Neither of us work on the engine of the docs itself, the thing that translates the markdown into the pretty picture that you see here. But we certainly work with those folks and give feedback to them.
And we do care about accessibility, definitely. It's one of the things I care very deeply about. So we do have a team which is outside of our team that does focus on accessibility. So we have ways of passing that information back if you need to.
Cool.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. So I was talking about the headings. So in that little mini TOC, it can bring you to the headings, the major headings in the article, the H2s actually in the markdown. You can see here when you hover over preview, there's a little link right there, and you click on that link, it actually will bring you to an anchor. And so then you could share the anchor to a specific point in the article. It's pretty common stuff, that link right there, right? And yeah, stuck on this animation somehow. All right, yeah, it goes up there. Cool. In the bottom left-hand corner, you see the download PDF option. You may have seen communication about this in the past. We actually reversed a decision to get rid of this whole PDF thing. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on how, one, this is valuable, two, how it could be a lot better. And so these PDFs are for people who need to consume docs for offline or remote use, like super high security environments, for example. So we've delayed the retirement of the PDF, but we are working on something new for offline docs downloads. So watch for new features in that space. And while we're talking about this screenshot of the article, let's talk about this article specifically, the What's New article. This one is for Azure SQL Database. There's also a What's New for SQL Managed Instance. There's a What's New for Fabric. I think there's a What's New for Azure SQL VMs. These are cloud products. They change a lot. They don't just change with a cumulative update or a year, right? So these pages, these What's New pages are great fodder, great inspiration for your own learning, for your own social media, for your own blogging. If you're ever looking for blog ideas and inspiration to talk about, I know when I was an MVP, I did. This is great. Go find out what's changed new. Go learn about it and blog about it. It's going to be a hot topic. It's going to be great to talk about. And this one particularly is a passion project of my own, so I definitely encourage you to look at it. All those words are mine. Let's talk a little bit more about the other solutions for offline docs. So if your work environment is behind an air-gapped or a high-security environment, I know a DBA works in a nuclear power plant, for example. And so he actually has to walk across a bridge, go to a computer that's on the internet, download and print out the PDFs of the docs that he needs, walk back across the bridge with the paper to go into the plant because there's absolutely no internet access allowed in the plant. High security, totally understandable. This is one of the ways you could do that kind of thing. The PDF is one of those things we talked about. We have new things on the way. This is actually an older way to use Management Studio to download content. In fact, for some older version-specific content, for example, if you need the docs as they appeared in SQL 2014, it's actually only available in this offline format. So I don't know how many of you work with offline help, but this could be very valuable to you in a pinch, especially if you're a consultant. I worked in a couple environments like that myself. So our documentation is actually pretty important to Microsoft. They're very large organizations. In the public sector, a very large organization called the United States Department of Defense, for example. Very large private sector companies. They want their development environments and the environments secured from the public internet. So in the case of Microsoft documentation for SQL Server, for Power BI, for Azure, for Fabric, for things like that, all sorts of products, our documentation is hosted on GitHub. So all you have to do is really just do a git pull. And now you've got all the documentation. It may not look to have all the same bells and whistles of the website, but you've got all the content there. It's in Markdown. It's definitely very readable, even in a rich format, right? So we have clients. Microsoft has clients who rehost, who pull regularly and rehost their docs internally in those environments, sequestered away from the internet, so they can get the best of both worlds: secure network for development and fresh access to product documentation. So this is much better than some of the other options that our competitors have, right? Okay, moving on. One more really cool thing in Management Studio for DBAs. So this is one of those things that if you're not in the data, we're talking about a data group right here. So Management Studio, not a lot of people are aware of this. When you have any text highlighted and you go and hit F1 on your keyboard, in Management Studio, in Data Tools, or just in Visual Studio, the browser should bring you right to the corresponding article for that word or syntax that you highlighted. So here you can see DM exec sessions, very powerful dynamic management view, brings you right to the article, right? It's pretty cool. This assumes your workstation has access to the internet and you have selected the help preference of open in browser. This also works if you have the offline stuff downloaded and selected. And it'll bring you directly to the article that you want, and it works for many different keywords. If you hit F1 and it brings you to an article that you didn't expect, or the wrong article, or just like a launch page or something like that, that's actually good feedback that we could use perhaps to help, and you could help us get a pull request started to fix that kind of thing. Right? We're going to talk about that very soon.
We have an open issue right now with F1 keyword not matching.
There you go.
So it is legitimate feedback, and we take it very seriously.
Let's talk about versioning a little bit. This is one of the more complicated programmatic features of the Microsoft Docs website. And you can see this in the Markdown as well. If you look at certain articles, you may see some tags that look like this, what I have highlighted here. They're called either a moniker range up at the top or moniker range, moniker end down in the contents with the 3 colons in front of them. So where it makes sense, the same document, the same Markdown article might include different information for different versions of the product. So not just like SQL Server 17, 19, 2022, but also Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, Fabric, Synapse, everything else that goes into that, right? We may have that same article, the same one Markdown file, serve up different pages on the website, depending on what you have selected in that version dropdown. So the version dropdown that you see over here, right, on the right, so it defaults to SQL Server 2022, or whatever your cookie has, right? So we may use the same article with various versions of content that changes sentences or changes whole sections or changes the whole article for Windows versus Linux for SQL Server, or different releases of SQL Server, or different Azure implementations. So for example, here is a code snippet showing how we're using a different sentence in the trim syntax, depending on what version of the database engine, again, you're running. So if a doc doesn't look quite right to you, again, check that version drop-down list. Make sure you're looking at the correct version. If you don't see something in the TOC, check that version drop-down, because the TOC is dynamic. The TOC changes to what articles are present depending on the version you have selected. So sometimes we'll handle versioning in tabs inside the document, or we'll clearly state versions in the applies tos, but we try to be a little smarter than that sometimes. We also don't try to hide new features of the product from the article, right? So if a feature exists only in 19 or 2022, we try not to hide that from people who have selected 2017. We want you to know about the new versions of the product. It helps your eventual migration path. It helps your knowledge in the future. But sometimes it makes sense to hide those things or to just version them off. We have multiple ways and different strategies and judgment calls to handle how different versions are going to be documented. So again, about old content, so older versions of SQL Server content before SQL 2016, we do still have ways to access that, even if it's offline docs only, like I showed on the last slide. And while we do support content for all the supported versions of SQL Server, it's a friendly reminder that SQL Server 2012, if you still have 2012 running, extended support ended almost 2 years ago. And for SQL 2014, extended support ends this July. July 2024, 2014 is going to be out of extended support, which may mean it's already out of mainstream support for you, depending on your licensing, right? So if you don't already have a migration plan in place for those SQL 2012 or 2014 SQL boxes, it is time. Okay, any questions on that? Any questions on anything that we just talked about for learn.microsoft.com, any of the features of the website, anything like that?
Nothing in the chat, but we are willing to listen to your questions in real time if you just want to come off mute.
Totally. Okay. Let's talk about contributing to docs, right? We've given a step-by-step tutorial right here in this URL, which again, you can click on the screen right now and go there. Actually, it does not appear that that is clicked on the screen. It's easy enough. Learn.microsoft.com/contribute. Note to myself to fix that link in the future. That'll guide you through the process of contributing to a Microsoft doc via a pull request in GitHub. We're going to talk all about that. You're going to know what that is by the end of this meeting. By contributing to Microsoft Docs for any product or technology, you're going to be part of the community that everyone uses. And we'll talk about the contributor designation at the top of the article as well. We average 160 million page views a month, 10 million page views a month on SQL Docs alone. So that's not nothing. That's a lot of exposure. If you want, you can do this entirely within the browser on github.com. There is nothing to download or install. You can download and install Git tools and all sorts of other things. You can also do it entirely in the browser. I know as a former DBA, I didn't live in Git all the time, right? But you can do it entirely within the browser. There's big green buttons to hit. I'll show you how easy it is. I'm literally going to step by step how easy it is. You don't have to go and learn Git. All you need is a free github.com account. So let's walk through it. You should really, first off, you should really enable, this is a public service announcement, important safety tip. You should really enable two-factor authentication on your GitHub account. It's actually required for us, and it may be required for you and your enterprise GitHub account. To enable access to certain repositories, you're going to have to enable two-factor authentication. I recommend not only using your phone number for this, by the way. Phone number text spoofing is pretty much a known thing right now, so try to use something besides a phone number, a text message, something like that. Definitely recommend not just using your phone number. Definitely recommend using other types of hardware keys or certificates. I think you can hook your GitHub account up to your Windows Hello, so you can unlock your GitHub account with your face. Definitely stuff like that is more secure. Regardless of the authentication factor, make sure to download and save your two-factor authentication recovery code. So if you lose your primary method of authentication, you can always unlock it. Take two-factor authentication seriously with your email, with your bank, with other important things, and do not lose your recovery codes. Store them somewhere safe, perhaps in a literal vault or a safe in your office, something like that. If you lose your device and you don't have your recovery codes and you don't have your multi-authentication account, you're going to lose access to your account. It cannot be covered. Even if you remember your password, it will not help. This has happened to Microsoft engineers, so it could happen to you too, right? And we own GitHub, right? All right, cool. Okay, while you're at it, we're talking about other cool things with GitHub. Did you know that GitHub has a dark mode now? Raise your hand if you're a dark mode enthusiast for all your apps. This is definitely hurting Randolph, physically hurting Randolph right now. Wish them well.
That's
huge.
That's why my thumbs down.
Huge dark mode enthusiast, dark mode everything, please. So a couple ways to change your theme in GitHub. You can go to your account settings and appearance. They have a ton of different dark modes, including high contrast and different color blindness options as well. And you can have even GitHub automatically sync to your Windows appearance settings. So if your Windows goes from light mode to dark mode at night and day, you can have your GitHub do the same thing. Let's talk more about GitHub. Let's talk more about dark mode, rather. If you're an enthusiast for dark mode, learn.microsoft.com has a dark theme too. You can see it in the footer. You can also see the high contrast option there. So check out the footer of any doc's website, learn.microsoft.com, to change your theme. Dark mode has also arrived in all of these other places, in LinkedIn, in Teams, in Office apps like Word and Excel. They have dark mode now, in Xbox. It's awesome. All right.
Calm down. Calm down.
Sorry, Randolph. Dark mode's great. Okay. To be clear, let's talk about Doc's feedback. We kind of touched on this a little bit in the question earlier. What belongs in Doc's pull requests, right? For support issues, contact support and a partner. So there are the feedback options we're talking about. We're talking about creating a pull request in GitHub. There's no SLA. We're not Microsoft support. We're not going to help unbrick your server or something like that. If you're having a problem, an unexpected behavior, an outage, a production issue, you need troubleshooting, contact Microsoft support or your support partner. The stuff that we're talking about is not going to offer that kind of thing. For product ideas, product feedback, here are your links. AKA MS SQL feedback. Real easy to remember. Great for product ideas. You can go see the other product ideas that everybody else has voted for. You can vote for them as well. That's good stuff right there about the product. Again, we're not looking for suggestions or questions about the product or how to do something in the product. That's not something we can take action on our side. We're very nice, but we can't help you in some of those cases, right? But a good pull request that gets attention is something to add that is missing, or to fix something that is outdated or wrong, or just something that could be improved to prevent an error or an outage. Inside Microsoft, we would call that deflection. Right? How are we deflecting support requests with a good doc? We would love contributions that help us deflect support requests, maybe like the one you just resolved, right? That you just troubleshooted. So, contributing. You found something in the documentation that's wrong or out of date or missing or something you want to add. Let's get started with the pencil edit. So top right-hand corner of the doc, above the title, you're going to see a pencil button. Click that. Right? Again, I'm walking you through it step by step. Clicking the pencil button gets you into GitHub. You're going to see a GitHub preview of the article. Now you're no longer on learn.microsoft.com. You're on github.com, and you're looking at GitHub's version of the Markdown. From here, click the pencil button again. So 2 pencil buttons in a row. At some point, if you've never done this before, you're going to get a screen in the middle that says, hey, you need to fork this. Just hit the green button, fork it, you're done. It's a behind the scenes thing I'm going to explain later. You only have to do that once. Usually, you're going to hit 2 pencil buttons, and then bam, you are looking at actual raw Markdown code in a text box in a website. Real easy to get here. So we haven't really talked about this yet. It might surprise you to learn that Microsoft Docs are not edited in Microsoft Word. Rather, they're in code. Yeah, right? That would be terrible. Rather, they're edited in code, either Markdown, which is very common, or YAML, which is becoming more common. YAML you're going to see in some files like our TOCs, our landing pages, and our FAQs. Markdown is a lightweight text markup language, so it's very readable, right? You're going to get some brackets in there for URLs and includes. You can see those, but otherwise, like asterisks for bold and italics, things like that, the pounds for the headings. This actually might be more familiar than you think. A lot of things use Markdown. So we use GitHub's own formal implementation of Markdown called GitHub Flavored Markdown. That's their flavor of Markdown. But many different websites use Markdown for their content, including GitLab, Reddit, Stack Exchange, Bitbucket, Drupal, and a lot more. So you might already know Markdown without having realized it. So in this text editor, start typing. You can make your changes here in the text box. If you're not familiar with Markdown, it's pretty easy to understand once you get rolling. It's not exactly code. The hyperlinks and some of the include files will look a little wonky to you. You don't worry about that. Just write around those. It's pretty easy to understand, though. Don't worry about it being perfect. Don't worry about it being formatted perfectly either. We just want the technical content and the conversation started to be introduced in the pull request here. So make your changes. The content team is always going to review your content submission and potentially tweak it to Microsoft standards. We're going to make sure that things that are bold should be bold, italics and code samples and things like that. We're going to make sure that's all formatted correctly. You make sure the technical details are right. There's plenty of resources online about the basics of Markdown syntax, but really, if you don't get something right, don't sweat it. We're not going to reject it. Then, big green button, commit changes. Here you can propose your changes by committing your changes to your own branch. What this looks like next is a big pop-up comes up. You're going to enter your pull request's title. You can just keep the default one if you'd like. Give us some comments. The default commit message is fine. It will be public, so make sure it's informative, not offensive, not embarrassing to you, for example. If you're not familiar with GitHub terminology like a pull request or a commit, don't worry, you don't have to be. You're literally hitting giant green buttons. There's nothing more to it. Click the giant green propose changes button, and really we'll take it from there. So you hit 2 pencil buttons, you did some typing, 2 big green buttons, and you've made a pull request. You've gotten the process started to being potentially contributed for having improved Microsoft documentation. It's that easy. We're going to keep you posted. You're going to receive emails. We'll keep you updated. We might ask questions. This is 2-directional communication at this point. As the pull request moves through the process to its eventually merge, and your commit will be merged into the public history for this article. Your changes to the markdown of the file are going to be triaged. They're going to be reviewed. The content team, somebody like us, somebody who's probably more of just a grammar and style person who's non-technical, is going to review it as well. We are going to make further edits as necessary. We usually do. Don't take it personal. And eventually, we're going to decide whether or not to merge your changes or maybe put it forward for a future semester's work or something like that. You'll be notified along the way with direct feedback from GitHub. Again, you can do all of this through your own tooling. If you already know what you're doing with like VS Code and a local installation of Git and Git Bash, that's what we use every day. If you already use that, yep, it's the same process. Or you can use the website, 2 pencil buttons, 2 big green buttons, and you've committed a pull request. Real easy.
Yep.
Yeah.
We might also take what you've done and combine it with another internal pull request, which is it'll close yours, but we'll still give you credit. You'll still get all the contributors, cool stuff. It's just handled slightly differently because we might have to make bigger changes behind the scenes. But the important thing is if you make a contribution, we will do our utmost to make sure you get credit for that and get recognized for it.
Yeah, look, we're former MVPs. We want you to receive the credit. So even if your pull request gets closed, it's really your commit that's in your branch. We can pull that in. We're actually going to show you about the behind the scenes part. We're going to show you the repositories that are not public and how they work too. And so this is what we want, right? We don't want your verbatims. We don't want Q&A stuff. We would love to get a direct contribution in pull request. Okay, we do want your verbatims and the Q&A conversation. Fine. The pull requests we find to be very high quality. They're thought through, right? They're at least on the way to a more complete solution, and they're solution oriented. They're not just a complaint, right? Somebody's actually thought through about how this would work potentially in the doc, or how this could be phrased better, right? That is actionable. That gets you credit for contribution. So again, if you want to use just github.com to do all of this, it's pretty easy, and it's entirely nothing to download. So again, here's the process. Assigned to human reviewers, human and automated messages from the build engine appear in the conversation tab. Select files change. I'm going to show you each one of these things right now. Others can make comments or suggestions. We could comment back and forth to each other. We might make more commits on top of your commit and eventually get something merged. So here's what it looks like after you have submitted your pull request. First, the automated systems kick in. You can see a bunch of automated messages here in the GitHub conversation history. They're going to be assigning. They're going to be adding some labels, assigning people, assigning humans to them. So human authors and human reviewers are assigned, and so both human and automated messages will appear in this conversation tab. You see the blue arrow right there? That's the actual commit. That is the thing that contains your changes and that we can bring eventually get to merged into the actual repository. If you have another edit to make, let's say you make your first edit, you go and look at it again, there's something else, or there's a typo in my own work, something like that. You could see the two arrows here, there's two commits. Two commits show up in the conversation tab. A branch can include one or many commits for one or many files. So you could even make the same change in two different files if you'd like to, all through the website. A pull request is simply a relationship between two branches. I'm going to show this to you in another way soon, but that's it. It's a relationship between two branches, and a branch contains commits. So how would you go about adding another commit? So if you want, at the top right here, you can see how it's created in the little box right here. It's created in Kendra's account and in patch 6, which is just an automatically named branch. You can see in the red box here, you can click on that and you can get more edits to this and other files. You'll be looking at your branch, then you can go and find the file you want and start editing there as well. That's how you can add more than one commit to more than one file. There's another way to do it too. I'll show you in a second. So your pull request will start in an open status. Let's look at one that's already been merged. Show you what the end result is. So this pull request has already been accepted. It's been reviewed, and soon it will be merged to the live production repository. And then the website will pull it and show that live. We publish twice a day, and usually so this happens within a day. So this was an excellent pull request, by the way, that is worth showing off. I don't know Vlad DBA specifically, but very well done. You can see what GitHub did here for us was to automatically create in the background a fork of this repository. This is SQL Docs repository. And then it's created that branch name, patch 1. Again, it's just going to keep iterating the patch numbers automatically for you. And those are fine. You don't have to give it a more fancy patch name. This pull request also includes the commit. You can see in the red right there, that's the actual commit with the proposed change. If you go down to the bottom of the screen, let's see what happened. So the pull request log contains both automated and manual messages from humans and computers, right? The conversation notes from everybody, including any back and forth. And eventually, someone on the content team, like myself, like Randolph, will review, maybe make some edits, and then sign off on the change. Have it merged, and then you'll see those kind of comments too. So that's me right there. You'll receive an email anytime someone tags your username in GitHub. You can respond in conversation and so forth. There's a comment box at the bottom, so you can keep the conversation going back and forth. In the Files Changed tab of every pull request, so we're looking at a pull request right here. We were in the Conversation tab. Now we're in the Files Changed tab. Once it's created, everybody, the public, Microsoft, can see the changes that you have suggested in the pull request. So here's the Files Changed tab, which is an in-browser diff. Right? It's a text diff, and it shows the old code on red on the left and the new code in green on the right, with the changed characters highlighted. Sometimes GitHub gets lazy and just says that, hey, this paragraph has changed and doesn't highlight all the characters. That's frustrating. But yeah, keep in mind that could happen. And here it's actually doing the changed characters. It's highlighted them.
You can modify the white space view to try and get around that issue, but it does hide other things.
It could hide carriage returns, spaces, things like that. But so if you didn't like that side-by-side mode right here, let me go back. If you didn't like the side-by-side mode and you're used to seeing kind of one on top of the other, you can go to the unified view and you'll see the changes stacked in the gear modes. Let's see that. Maybe this is what you'd like to see too. Some people have religious opinions about this. So you can see the updates you've made to make the sentence clearer. Perhaps a sentence that didn't translate well or was unclear or vague. This is a very good edit. If you're trying to describe how something should change, simply making the change yourself is usually easier. You know, show, don't tell. It's easier than trying to describe, hey, in the third sentence of this paragraph, there's a thing that you could do. Show us, right? We may change it from there, but this is much clearer to everybody, especially the context and everything, right? So again, if you want to make more changes to the file, you can simply create another commit. Let's talk about that another way. Simply click on the three dots icon over here on the right, click Edit File. You open up the same file's text editor again, make some changes, big green button, and boom, you've added another commit to the same branch on the same file, included in the same pull request. There's even more, though, more interactive and collaborative ways to contribute to pull requests in GitHub. I want to show you an animated GIF. There's the big blue plus button.
My favorite feature.
This is so cool. By the way, this is new in GitHub in the past year or two. I wanted to show this off because GitHub introduced this, and it's very useful. You can create very specific targeted suggestions to an in-progress pull request. You might see us do this to your pull requests, or vice versa. In the in-browser suggestions, this is a really easy way to create a specific correction to a specific sentence. So we do this internally all the time. When I'm working with engineers or product managers or things like that, we do this internally to make suggestions, things like that. Minor edits, like we talked about before, can be done entirely within the browser. And you can comment, you can make changes here. So instead of editing the whole file, you or anyone else, and I'll repeat anyone, by the way, because your pull requests are public, can join your effort to update the doc by contributing a suggestion. So maybe after you create your pull request, blast it on social media, other MVPs, other people in the community will come and say, hey, we could even do this. And they could contribute in this way with the big blue plus button. Yeah. Okay. So now you're editing. Whenever you hit the big blue plus button on that line, you can also click and drag the blue plus button to select more than one line and to create a suggestion on more than one line. Then you could submit this. The actual author can take your comment and then commit it, and then it shows up actually as a cool co-authored commit with two people's GitHub accounts associated to it. That's pretty cool. Yes, sir.
I'm going to confess a recording that I did not know you could drag down that plus button to do multiple lines.
What? Yeah, I got another GIF. Check this out. This is in dark mode, by the way. Dark mode. Watch this. Watch this. Drag. Womp. Now I'm creating a suggestion on 2 lines.
That is cool. Today I learned.
Everybody's learning something. And you see I added that single commit, and this is how it shows up. And then whoever owns it can do that commit suggestion. Again, another big green button, and now we've co-authored a commit. How cool is that? All of this makes it really easy to collaborate with doc authors and reviewers entirely within github.com on these pull requests. So after you've submitted the pull request and you're happy with the changes, you can sit back. We've got it from here. We'll eventually do the magic keywords to get things emerged. If we have questions, we'll ask them. If we have status updates. Again, no SLA on these things. Sometimes you'll get to them promptly. Sometimes it takes a while. A lot of times we have to confer with other people internally to make sure that we're not breaking technical changes, things like that. So eventually, someone, usually the content developer like Randolph or myself, or the author of the article will write pound sign off in the pull request comments. You'll see that. You can't do that. We can do that. You'll see that, though, in the end. More information will then show up in the pull request log. If it's small enough and if it qualifies for a few different criteria, it might be pretty quick. Sometimes it will require a human reviewer. This non-technical style and grammar person will take a shot at it and making sure that everything looks good. Again, another human. This is somebody who works with us a lot, so we're pretty familiar with those things. We publish twice a day, usually around 10 a.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Pacific. And then once merged, the doc will be published on learn.microsoft.com. And it's that easy. Some repos have another window at around 4 a.m. Pacific. They have 3 publishing windows. I think SQL Docs is just the 2. And then this is what goes on your MVP activity report. If you contributed via a pull request, that's a commit. We merge that commit into the repository, and you'll see your GitHub profile, pick, and link. So the folks listed here, for example, is a nice big tall list. These are folks internal to Microsoft and external to Microsoft, people from the general public like you that have submitted commits to this article. Now, it's worth mentioning if you start a pull request, like Randolph said earlier, even if we close it and pull your commits into another pull request and they get committed eventually, you will still be recognized here. Even if your pull request was closed, we'll still have captured your commits. Also, these contributions are definitely part of your MVP application or your MVP renewal activity. Fair warning, again, about the qualitative versus quantitative. If you're making a whole bunch of style and punctuation changes, not nearly as meaningful as actual technical content and technical additions. Okay.
Although we do appreciate typo fixes.
Absolutely, we appreciate them. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I had a good one come in the other day. I was really thankful for that kind of thing. I don't know if it's going to move the meter on the MVP list as much, just being a grammar corrector, but yeah. Okay, so we want you to contribute. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. You've seen 2 pencil buttons, 2 big green buttons to make it easy as possible for you to contribute. So we want to ease your anxiety and fear about it. It's part of why we're doing this presentation. Let's talk more about that. So if you're not sure how it should change exactly, you're not sure what the complete solution is, that's actually okay. If it's not quite right, if it's not formatted perfectly, again, don't worry. We will adjust it, but at least you've introduced a fix. At least you've drawn attention to it. So don't be afraid to submit a pull request. Here's some other notes that are going to put you at ease. So let me go back. So for images, graphics, and charts, we have designers to have images updated in a standardized way. There's no need to edit images yourself. If you want to do something in Photoshop and submit that kind of thing, we probably wouldn't use it because we'd have to adhere to a certain style or something like that. It could still be helpful. But just kind of tell us how the image should change and maybe help us with the surrounding text if something needs to fix or be updated for something like that. Alt text for an image, by the way, if you find that that is insufficient or not explaining it correct, that's a good submit too. Alt text, just like any other accessibility issue on the web, right? Let me go back. Capitalization. Let's talk about capitalization. Capitalization is tough. SpongeBob font emphasis on capitalization is tough. The capitalization of various features and products inside Microsoft is one of the most nuanced and difficult things there is about publishing content. Marketing usually wins. Marketing always wins these arguments, regardless of how the documentation evolves, regardless of what the engineers have put in the UI sometimes. Marketing wins these arguments when it comes to what gets capitalized and what is the actual product's name and how should it be shortened or abbreviated, if at all. We sometimes get big pull requests that come through to make a lot of capitalization changes that were well intended but misguided in the end. We get these. We try to coach, but we don't end up merging those. The task is tricky enough when you have inside information directly from the inside sources. So we handle a lot of that. We definitely like your input on inconsistencies between marketing content, documentation content, training content. And you should know we're regularly discussing this internally about what is and what is not capitalized. For example, product names and feature names and the phrasing of those are difficult to get just right. And they're trickiest when a generic word is in the product name. So just because we have a product called Azure SQL Database doesn't mean that every time we write the word database, it's capitalized anymore. Or Azure Functions or Azure Firewall. Those are generic things. They're not capitalized every time you write down function or firewall. Those are oversimplistic, but that extends to other things, and you'll probably see that as you go through docs. So try to remember that when you go to Taco Time, which is a Pacific Northwest staple of fast food up here, although being from Louisiana in the United States where we have things in our food called flavor, we find that Taco Time is not super interesting. You have to put down a lot of hot sauce on it. But anyway, when you go to Taco Time, you eat a lowercase taco, not an uppercase taco, just because you bought it at a place that has an uppercase taco in its name. I think I explained that correctly.
Unless you're in German.
Yeah. This is even more difficult for our international partners and customers, like Randolph just hinted at, because capitalization often means that a product or service name should not be translated, or it should be translated into a specific form of the word, whereas lowercase would be translated differently. So translation is difficult enough. We need to make sure we get the capitalization right and consistent so that it does not confuse translators and customers. One more thing that we do a lot. Oh, Randolph, did you have something?
I was going to say, and most of our translation is done by computers, not by humans, because there's just not enough resources in the world to do that manually.
Yeah, we have several dozen languages, and yeah, and many thousands of changes a day. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, good point there. So let's talk about comments in code. This is something you can help us with, and this is something you should be aware of too if you're contributing code. So comments in code are not translated. I'll repeat that. Comments in code are not translated. So that means that whatever the code snippet is, it has to be explained outside of the code snippet. We have to properly introduce what this code is doing in a way that would be translated for everybody. So if you see code that is commented but not properly explained outside of the comments, outside of the text, that's a good pull request. And that would help us make sure that everyone understands what this code is trying to do. Comments are fine. Comments are great. We're not against comments, but it has to be outside of the code as well, outside of the code snippet. Oftentimes, we'll take a very large code snippet with multiple steps and break it up so that we can put a plain text paragraph in between each snippet to explain what's going on. Randall?
And we also have content that's 30 years old. So there's a very good chance we'll have Platform books online that did have comments in the code, and we just haven't had a chance to get around to it yet. So if you do come across something like that, that's a great opportunity for a pull request.
Yep, some parts of the database engine have not changed since the 90s. So yes, we still have content for that. Okay, good stuff. Above all, when it comes to grammar, style, capitalization, code comments, everything else that we've talked about, the core goal of our brand voice is to, above all, be simple and human. So don't be too informal. Don't be like cute. Use common word choices, though. Stay away from jargon and extremely technical or academic terms, even if they're accurate, because that's not exactly approachable. So let's make sure we're writing docs that everyone can make use of.
That's a good point towards accessibility as well, because the average reader might not have a college education and may still be very advanced technically. So it doesn't mean that you have to use highfalutin language. Just keep it straightforward.
A great example of this is we actually have the word idempotent in our docs, IDEM potent. It's a academic computer programming term. You might be familiar with it, or you might not. If we use that word, we have to be sure to explain it in a whole paragraph what this word means, because it's an important technical concept, but we can't just drop that in there without explaining it. It's useless to somebody who doesn't understand that, who might not have had a computer science degree or something, right? So all of these things in mind, if you spot something in our docs that we can do better at, create a pull request. Help us meet our goal. That's great. Okay, let's talk more about localization. One thing, if you find a localization issue in a doc, we have a way to still do that, right? Even if it's machine translated, we still have ways to fix things. So if you've got a translation issue to raise, there's two use cases here, by the way. If you got a translation issue to raise, those are submitted by this Microsoft 365 form. Submit your feedback in any language. It will be translated and routed to the correct localization team. And then their feedback turnaround is that they'll acknowledge within 24 hours or triage within 24 hours. And then if it's a valid fix, if they're going to fix it, it'll be fixed within 1 or 2 weeks. If you've got a technical issue with an article and you're more comfortable submitting that issue in another language despite English, you don't have to do a pull request. You could use this form as well to create essentially create a pull request with another language through this form. It will then be passed on to the proper content teams, like our team. Either way, thank you for contributing to Microsoft Docs and making Docs better for everybody, right?
We
So,
had a
good
very
links.
I do want to talk about this localization thing. We had a very good scenario where the Chinese translation of a particular article changed the meaning to the opposite of what was the English version. And that's a very good example of where the original sentence wasn't in a way that was easily understood by the translation engine. And so we had to rewrite it in English to help the Chinese get translated correctly.
Yep. So the problem is not always in the translation. The problem could be in the English version of the sentence. Maybe we just need to make it simpler, make it more intuitive. That way, all the other translations will pick it up better.
Yeah.
We prefer to fix it that way, in fact, because it's more future-proof. Cool. All right. Any other questions? Anything we wanted to pause about, Randolph?
We have a question which was from Chris about half an hour ago, which I said we could wait until the end, but I think we could address it sooner than that. Chris asks,
let's do that, because we're about to change topics. We're about to dive into GitHub. Go ahead, Chris.
So what happens when a feature is deprecated? How does it appear in Docs?
There's a bunch of different ways it could appear. We do have an archiving thing, and you will eventually sometimes find yourself in a path that has the word archive in it, which implies that it's no longer monitored. It's not longer we're no longer open to feedback on that kind of thing. That's usually pretty drastic. A deprecated feature is still going to be documented as long as it's in a feature of SQL Server that's still supported.
Yeah, remember,
yeah,
there's a good example of this, which is stretched database, which was introduced a long time ago, and so was, for example, database mirroring. Database mirroring was deprecated, then it was undeprecated, then it was, they said they weren't any new features. As long as that feature is still in a supported version of the product, it will still be there, but with a deprecated notice. That notice may be along the lines of, in this version of the product, this feature has been deprecated. We encourage you to use different features, and we might even link to something else. So that's generally how it's shown, Chris. And if you do get thrown off to an archive, like a previous version of an article, we have, in one particular case, gone back and restored that content because it was still relevant. And I'm talking about Service Broker. Service Broker was sent out to pasture, and we realized that the content was still relevant, so we brought it back.
Yep. So you also find the content. It just probably have giant banners at the top. Big data clusters is one that I worked on. For example, big data clusters has banners all over the top talking about how it's been retired. Retired, deprecated, they mean different things legally. When lawyers get involved, we have to use retirement versus deprecated sometimes. But yeah, you'll see the language. It should be very obvious that something has been deprecated. If you find deprecated content that you suspect has been deprecated but is not properly notated as such, that's a pull request. Let us know. Let us improve those docs. Good question. We haven't outright killed any doc content in a long time, I don't think.
Oh, but we're about to.
Not in big chunks. Yeah, well, so because 2012 and 2014 are dropping out of support, there's a bunch of stuff, right? But yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
All right, so let's talk about GitHub. I'm going to walk you through how this whole thing works, and you're going to have a better understanding of this whole process if you've never done this before. So this is some inside baseball of how we use GitHub at Microsoft. So again, Microsoft Docs are edited in Markdown. Randolph and I spend most of our time in Visual Studio Code. Azure Data Studio also works the same to edit docs. We have other tools that help with automated link checking, with syntax formatting, with bulk updates, with a series of include files to tokenize things like product names. We have a rich, yeah.
You said inside baseball. You're speaking to an Australian audience. You say inside cricket.
Inside cricket. Inside the yeah. I did not expect a sports correction from you, Randolph.
Look, when it comes to cricket, I know more about cricket than you know about baseball.
That's fair. All Otherwise, Randolph is not usually a fan of the sports. We have a rich set of talking about how we use docs. We have a rich set of metadata for each article. We pay attention to how articles perform in terms of search engine optimization. That's actually a surprise to me when I joined the team, how much we actually pay attention to how a doc performs as a scale of like how well customers are getting information out of this. So for example, if a doc has a bunch of code snippets on it, but no one is trying the code, no one is copying the code or clicking the try it or the copy it button, something's wrong with the article. We need to go rewrite it. We need to go format it. We need to go move some things around, right? So we actually pay attention to a lot of that stuff that passively comes in from the millions of hits that we get every month. This is all on the back end driven by Azure Analytics and Kusto queries. And so we try to improve poorly performing articles. And we have many metrics to track an article without capturing any personal identification or otherwise wider tracking information. Most of our decisions with docs or doc layouts are then data-driven, and we're driven better engagement and more useful docs, and then we can see the numbers change. So that actually leads to improvements that we like to see. For big article updates, we have systems to handle what's called a release branch, where we kind of throw all our stuff in a branch from one branch to another branch, and then that branch is merged into the actual production branch. Sometimes we work on documentation for months, and then we release it all at once, like at Build or Ignite, one of these big keynotes where we have to release an entire new product, like we did in November with Fabric. Massive amounts of changes, thousands and thousands of lines of code. Well, we have a special thing. You can't just keep that in a single branch. We have these things called release branches. These many strategies are not different from how you release software or how you release a software patch all at once or something like that. And we use some of the same tools. And we're happy to answer any questions about that, by the way. But some of the basics of GitHub and how we use GitHub. So behind the scenes of how Docs works in GitHub, where all Microsoft documentation is managed. If you're new to Git and you don't understand this, don't worry. These next few slides are going to be very valuable for you. And don't worry, you don't actually have to do this stuff. Again, you can use the website entirely, github.com, to do all these things, right? Pencil, make your changes, green button, you've made a pull request. But here's how the basic GitHub workflow works. So a repository like Azure Docs, we work in SQL Docs a lot or in Fabric Docs a lot. These are all different repositories. This is where the source code is housed and where the website engine for learn.microsoft.com pulls Markdown to present a live picture to you in the website of the doc, right? A fork is a copy of that repository associated with your account up in GitHub, up in the cloud. It's just associated with your account. We have each created forks for all the repos that we work with in our own GitHub accounts. And this is created for you in GitHub with a single click of a big green button, first time you need it. So you only need to do a fork once, ever. To tell the two apart, a common convention is to reference your remote fork and your account as origin, and then the code base you eventually push to called upstream. These are called remotes or remote names. And these are just the common naming conventions. You can actually choose any name that you want. You'll have an origin and an upstream for then each repository that you work in. A clone is a copy of the fork brought down locally to your workstation. If you have multiple workstations, you have multiple clones. And the files are literally downloaded to your workstation so that you can start to make edits. So then when you start to make edits, you go to make changes to a file or to add or remove files. You'll create what's called a working branch that is relevant to just the chunk of changes you're making. You might have many branches going at given times as you're working on different aspects of the code. You want a branch to contain only the changes for a specific feature or issue or change that you're making so that it can go through the process and get published atomically, and it doesn't have to wait on something else, get stuck on something else. Your work goes into that branch. So, I always create my branches with an ISO date at the beginning of them, and then, some simple explanation of what it is that I am doing. Here it's called, ISO date fix issue. When you're done, you create a commit in the branch. So it takes all the changes you've made out of that branch, creates a commit for it. We talked about commits earlier, and that is in your cloning workstation. Then you will, but at this point, you've created a commit on your workstation. Microsoft has no idea of what you've done. GitHub has no idea that you've made any changes. So how does it get up to Microsoft? First, you push your changes from your local workstation up to your GitHub account. Now, GitHub knows that you've made this change. It has this commit. It has this working branch, right? Microsoft still has no idea that you've done anything. It's not until you create the pull requests associating a branch in your fork with a branch in the Microsoft repository. That's what a pull request is. Again, it's an association between two branches. Then you ask Microsoft Docs to accept commits from your repository's branch so that your changes can be merged from your fork into the repo's main branch. That's it. Now, to explain things a little closer to the reality of how we work internally, we actually have two repositories in the Microsoft Docs account, Azure Docs and then Azure Docs-PR, which you can't see because, like true professionals we are, we don't develop against production. Right? We only develop in this, right? We've never done that, especially when I was at DVA. We only develop in the preview or private repository, this -PR thing, but you can't see. It's a Microsoft internal thing. We develop in there, not accessible to the public. This allows us to work and preview the merge state of all our changes. And we actually have a preview engine that builds the website internally for us that we can see exactly what it's going to look like once it gets merged over to prod. And this build process to the live website is an all automated thing that we have. And there's a significant amount of engineering to prepare these really nice previews for us internally. And so when we publish from the -PR repository into the live Azure Docs repository. But you don't have to worry about that because when you submit pull requests, your entire workflow and all the validation steps that occurs also happens in a loop inside the public repository, inside Azure Docs. So again, this same Docs as code pattern applies to any Microsoft technology in Microsoft Docs. Everything that we've talked about today, even stuff that's not in the data platform. All right. If any questions about that, we'd be happy to dive into how GitHub works. Here are some really good links in learn.microsoft.com, fittingly, where you can learn how to contribute through github.com entirely within the browser, again, with nothing to download. But if you want to learn more about Git and GitHub, here's some great resources.
William, these also don't work. You didn't hot link these.
I need to put those links on there. Dang it.
I will tell you, Doug did say it's interesting stuff about similarities with software releases, which is why we call it companies code. Yeah,
that's right.
And
that's why we call it.
I had a question for you, William.
Oh.
Yes. My question to you, William, is why do your links not work?
This version of the PowerPoint, I think this version was from the intro. I don't know why it doesn't work. Frankly, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to fix that as a to-do on me. An action item. If Copilot, if you're listening, action item for William, fix these links. That way you could click it. But yes, these are all really good links. If you just search in learn.microsoft.com for Git or GitHub, you can get a whole learning path with a whole bunch of step-by-steps. I know when I first joined Microsoft, I had kind of used GitHub before, but I was a DBA. I didn't live in this stuff. So I took a crash course in Git Bash right off the front week of my employment here. Cool. Last stuff. And I know we're going a little long. How are we on time, Warwick? Are we going to start dropping?
No, we're good.
Great. I have some content about what's new in Docs, stuff that you may not have noticed, stuff that's new inside rugby, inside cricket, on what's going on inside Microsoft documentation.
You have to be careful with rugby because there's Aussie rules and union rugby. So you have to be careful there.
I do. I'm very careful with rugby. Okay. Speaking of credit, we've talked about credit for you, humans, to get credit, adding commits to documents. We also treat, we're obviously a big AI company now, right? We treat this very seriously when it comes to when we have used AI to write content. And there are approved services that we use to write AI content. There's some that are not approved, obviously, for private information. But we need a metadata tag to make it clear to everybody, internally, externally, and ethically, to acknowledge when AI has been used. And so you will already see articles that have this big gray box at the top. This article is partially created, partially always created with the help of AI. This is not an optional thing inside Microsoft. A pretty strict rule about this kind of stuff. We talk a lot about this. This is a step towards transparency. Yeah. Let's talk about Learn Profile stuff. So in this way, your Learn Profile can serve as like a digital resume, proof of skills. In Learn, you can select your profile icon at the top, and then you can go to the setting and account management, and you can associate your Learn Profile accounts together. Maybe you have one from college, you have one for personal, you have one for work. You can associate these things together and all the learning and all the achievements that you've done in your different Learn units. And you can also associate these with your actual certification exams that you've done as well. And then your Learn Profile is kind of everything that you have done and studied. And then you can socialize that stuff with the collections that we talked about earlier. This contributor home, if you haven't noticed, this new contributor home includes a new design center that has clear calls to action for contributors and options to connect with the community and an FAQ for contributors as well to show exactly the step-by-step, mostly what we covered in this presentation, step-by-step of how to contribute to pull requests. They will even walk you through how to do it with your own tools locally with like VS Code and Git Bash and things like that. This profile page puts your Learn, your assert. Go ahead, Mano.
This is new. This contributor home, we launched it soft launch last month, I think February, and we're excited to see how it goes.
I think it was a little older than that, but maybe that was just the preview stuff that we were seeing internally. But yes, this is new, definitely within the last 6 months. It puts your Learn, your certs, your Q&A, your docs collections, everything into one place, which you can then socialize, right? And it includes auto detection of your account's certification exams or any instructor-led training that you've bought and attended, stuff like that. It puts it all in one place. So you can get a transcript of your Learn modules, your exams, your certifications, even your historical certifications going all the way back from when you took that SQL Server 2005 certification exam to renew your SQL 2000 certification exam. But I failed the Windows 2000 certification. That was wasn't prepared for that.
It goes back all the way to 1997. Can confirm.
All right. I was still in high school. All right. Cool. So you can connect it to your Pearson VUE certification profile. Last thing there. Okay. We also have a Learn module on contributing. Exactly, pretty much what we've talked about today. If you want to go through that, recommend it to others. There's a Learn module that walks you through all the process with knowledge checks and exercises to get you through. Takes maybe 30 minutes to get you through GitHub fundamentals, how to do a pull request, what we're looking for in a published article, how to do it all within the web browser on github.com. That's cool.
William,
hey, that link works.
Do you know if this also links with LinkedIn profiles? I don't believe it does.
We own them. I don't see why it wouldn't, but I don't know, actually. I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but I mean, as you said, Microsoft acquired LinkedIn, and I'm sure it's in somebody's OKR. Somebody will decide to do it one day, and it'll happen.
It's a good question. All right. Hey, that's it. Y'all been great. This has been a great question and answer stuff. I love all the questions that are coming in. Shout out to Doug from my home state, Louisiana. Unless, Doug, you've moved recently to Australia, joining us from, 10, almost 11 o'clock your time. Thanks, Doug. Good to see you. Any other questions and answers? You've been a fantastic audience. We've shared a lot of content today. If you want me to go back over anything, let me know.
We had one question which I answered in the chat, which was, does everything in docs get included in the LLM or large language model used as part of GitHub Copilot? And I said, anything public is used by LLMs, and Microsoft Learn content is public. So you can assume that that is the case.
Assume that is the case for sure.
Hey, Will, can you hear me, mate?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. I just had a question. You mentioned anything that was generated by AI. If you were going to put that into a doc, that you would need to say so at the top, just for transparency. I was just kind of wanted to brush over that a little bit. I feel like that's kind of going to get more and more difficult as we go forward with AI generated content being so widespread now.
Yeah.
How much kind of, if you get kind of a one line out of a whole kind of script body, how would you have to specify that was AI generated? Like where's the?
Yeah, we have two layers. We have two levels. The one that is assisted by and the one that is mostly written by. And the assisted by is a paragraph or less, and then more than that, it's we have to have a tag that says it was I don't remember the terminology. It's more than just a simple.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Randall. That's a great answer. Very easy. Thanks.
The thing is that obviously we have to trust our content writers, right? Because nobody's looking at what I'm doing on my screen all day, but I can tell when somebody's written something, and I can tell when a machine has written it. And so if we see something weird, we'll call it out. Absolutely. The whole point of being in this space is to be ethical, because we have to lead by example. And so that's what we're trying to do here. And we hope we set a good example this way.
It's
of course
certainly not a hard and fast rule.
Yeah,
it's more of an ethical expectation.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I do really lean on the AIs for some tech writing sometimes, but I'll go through with my own eyes and fix it up with my human hands. But I'm just, there's a grey areas, and they're just getting more grey as we go forward in time.
Of course, consider this type of ethical transparency for your own blogs, for your own writing. I think that would be a positive.
Absolutely.
It would not be delegitimizing at all.
Yeah, no, thank you. Absolutely, thanks.
Cool. Good questions. Good stuff.
Just as a side comment to that, as content reviewers, you would be receiving a lot of content, and some of that will be coming from the same content creators. And you start to know how those content creators write, what their style is, what type of words they use. And so then one of the things to think about there is it's also quite easy to capture when all of a sudden that has a massive deviation, because that's what the AI generated content will do.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the large language models these days are getting pretty smart at copying personalized styles of writing, though.
They are copying styles, but right now, I'm not speaking about the future. None of us can predict the future. Right now, we can still see if it has been generated by a machine, because there's something wrong. If you're a professional writer, something isn't quite right. Having said that, though, I was a school teacher, and I could tell if one of my students submitted something that was written by them. So yeah.
A lot of times AI is way too expository, right? Way too verbose. If we're looking for a step-by-step, it's pretty easy to tell.
For sure, yeah.
Now, it's easy to tell now.
So
that's where the deal is, that we're leading by example with our ethical posture.
And this tag could have implications in the future too. Perhaps this tag could prevent like a regurgitation effect in the future. We think it's important to get out in front of this. So we're trying to lead the way and be ethical about that kind of thing. This is not a legal requirement. It's a totally internal, optional, ethical requirement that we have made mandatory. So cool. Good question. Anybody else?
The great thing about Skynet coming is that it's not plugged into the internet, so we're fine.
I don't know. Yeah. The form of GPT that Bing Chat uses is hooked up to the internet, so.
I know.
Yeah.
I saw a funny meme today with the world of AI in movies is just Terminators, but the real world is just a guy looking at a hot chick generated by AI.
Oh, you're going to get that application. Right? Yeah. I heard on that topic, I heard a pretty good saying that I think is going to come true, and I've like consoled my kid about this and stuff. Your job will not be replaced by AI. Your job will be replaced by somebody using AI. Or you will not lose your job to AI. You will lose your job to somebody else who is using AI. I think for now that's potentially accurate.
Learn your prompt engineering, that's all.
Oh, thanks. All right. That's a very good class. I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Great. Hope you learned a lot about GitHub, about Microsoft Docs, even a little AI at the end.
Yeah,
Thanks,
100%.
Warren,
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Nice. Thank you, William. Thank you, Roundup. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this session. For those of you who did join partway through, just so that you are aware, this session has been recorded and will be uploaded onto the Data Platform Down Under YouTube channel, where you can come back and rewatch this at any point in time. So make sure we haven't got next month's session up, but we will look at getting that up hopefully shortly. But with that, look forward to the invites for the next coming sessions. Thank you all for being part of this. Big thank you to our presenters giving up their time to enhance our knowledge. So thank you, everybody.